Hello everyone, this is Ben, and in this video we're going to talk about the ethics of lying. Is lying wrong? What really qualifies as a lie? The ins and outs of that. It's kind of odd because I've been wanting to do a video on this for a little while now, and I was a little bit stalled because lo and behold it became subject of study at my church, and it was kind of weird. Like, should I do it now? It's kind of weird. I guess it's not really that weird, but I'm gonna just do a video on lying because that was what I was gonna do anyway. It makes it sound like it's some sort of response, which that really isn't. Why I started, I wanted to do this, although there are plenty of things I want to respond to, but just nothing recently. So when it comes to lying, let's just think about the general wisdom, what people generally think about lying. Most people will generally believe that it's wrong, it's immoral to lie to other people, that and oftentimes people will justify a condemnation of someone else solely on the basis that they told a lie. That's the whole reason, It could be, it doesn't even matter if it was about something important, it's just the fact that they're a liar, and if someone's a liar, it follows that you can't rely on them. You can't trust that person or count on that person when that person's a liar. So, of course, a person can be untrustworthy and unreliable for more reasons just than that person is a liar. And so before we get too deep into this, I want to make a point that this subject is actually really complicated, and I'm not super planned out with this. And the problem is with lying and discussing it is that you're actually discussing communication, and communication is a huge subject, and so it's very difficult to not open up a huge can of bigger questions and not follow a million rabbit trails, because it's like you keep opening you leave. If you don't follow all the rabbit trails, you're basically leaving like a million loose ends. So, but most people would lying's bad. People don't like when they're lied to. One of the examples that the Way of the Master guys, Ray Comfort and Kirk Cameron, they ask someone, have you told a lie? And the person says, yeah, and they say, what does that make you? And it says, well, I'm not a bad person, as in, I'm about average, I wouldn't call myself bad. But then you say, okay, has anyone told you a lie? And you say, yeah. What do you call someone who tells you a lie? A liar. So there's that sort of double standard where we're a little bit more harsh toward other people than we are towards ourselves. But that term liar, just to label someone a liar, is pretty, it's not a good thing to be labeled. And so my point is this: it's generally agreed on that lying's bad. Now, most people, growing up, I remember people telling me that a little white lie is okay. A little white lie, that's what I always heard. It's even in the movie Forrest Gump. I think Forrest Gump came out in 94. And Forrest Gump's mom tells him that a little white lie doesn't hurt anyone, so it's okay. So, generally in my experience, the common wisdom is that if anyone's going to justify a lie, it's going to be on the little white lie basis, that's a lie that didn't hurt anyone. There are other situations where, like in war, here's an example. I don't know if this actually happened, but there was a movie where the Allies had figured out the Nazi codes, and they knew how to give the Allied ships directions so that they would avoid the German submarines that were coming to sink them. But they had to sometimes just let Allied ships be sunk so that the German ships wouldn't catch on that they'd broken the code and then change the code because it was their advantage. And so it's sort of a telling of a lie, because you're giving directional coordinates to the boat where to go so that they can do the mission that you gave them, which is go deliver this to here or go attack this. And in reality, you're sending them straight towards the Germans to be destroyed. And that's their mission, kind of thing. And you don't tell them that, and they didn't really sign on for that, to be intentionally sunk. And so you're lying to them. You're telling them one thing, but you're sending them into something else. And that's a different sort of justification. You say it's not really a little white lie that didn't hurt anyone. Actually, a bunch of people are going to die. But it's, the whole ends justify the means. It's for the greater good so that we can stop the Nazis and win the war, kind of thing. So that means you touch on utilitarianism and these big questions of like overarching ethical theories, and it's like, man, we got into some pretty heavy stuff pretty fast with this. One of the oddest justifications for lying I've heard, I heard someone, this guy, he claimed that there's like a cliche question where the woman asks her husband, and it's funny, I found out recently that the word wife actually just means woman. It's an old English word. Probably pronounced with, the with. But I don't really know that. The question is, she says, do I look good in this outfit, or do I look good, before I'm going out? Or does this dress or whatever I'm wearing, does this outfit make me look fat? Or do you like my hair today, my new hair that I got? Or, something like that. And this guy claimed that in that situation, it was correct to lie. And so that was his argument that, like, I think he sort of drew the point. He didn't really make it real clear, but I think he was drawing the conclusion that because it was okay to lie in that situation, then you can't say that lying's bad. And he seemed to sort of perhaps set up a false dilemma where lying's either bad all the time or it's good all the time. It's never, in other words, like it's either never okay or it's either okay. And whereas most people who believe in the little white lie theory think that it's okay in some situations and not okay in others. So that's a third alternative that he's just kind of leaving out. Another thing that he's leaving out is that, his justification is that women are sensitive and have feelings that can be hurt if you tell them that they look bad, even though they might actually look bad. But the problem, one of the things that irked me about it is, like, in my experience, men are just as sensitive. It's just about different things. And the male sensitivity works in different ways. So men tend to, not care about things, not care about things, not care about things. But it's not like men never care about anything and nothing ever hurts them or they never get upset. That's ridiculous. If men didn't get upset, then we wouldn't, have men building bombs to go blow up. It's men who build all those war machines. So, let's see. Adolf Hitler seemed pretty upset, didn't he, when he was giving those speeches? I'll give you an example. Let's say that there's a leak under the sink, and you're fixing it, and you're the man, and the woman comes like every 5 minutes, maybe every 10, 15 minutes, and says, have you figured out what's wrong with it? And you're like, no. You haven't found where the leak's coming from or something? No. And she's like, well, can you fix it? I don't know, because I haven't figured out what's wrong with it. Well, what are we going to do? And it's like, there's a sort of a lack of faith thing right there that can really hurt a man's feelings. Because, in other words, like, just because I haven't created 100% confidence in you, can you just, like, extend a little faith, on something? Like, I don't, like, you wouldn't appreciate me if I treated you like that, but, like, you don't really do things like this that I can come in and judge specifically success or failure, and so, it's pretty difficult. That can really hurt. Like, I know a lot of guys, like, or some guys, even if the woman says, like, do you want me to call somebody to fix it? That, in reality, he might actually need, some help. But he may have a hard time admitting that. That may be a hard pill to swallow. So a question like that can be, a man can be every bit as sensitive about that as a woman can be about, does this make me look fat? Like, men have pride issues too. At the core, that's what both of those are. The woman is too proud to admit that, there might be some flaw in her fantastic image, and the man might be too proud to admit that there might be some flaw in his fantastic abilities. Bottom line. Okay, so, it makes him sad because he was real excited about how awesome he was. And, there is this, I mean, that even touches on a larger subject. So, like, I don't know how to talk about it without just kind of delving into it, but we'll just kind of delve into it right here. This is going to be all over the place because I don't know how else to do this. One of the things that creates depression and despair is when you're a failure, or when you feel like your life doesn't mean anything. No one, cares that you exist, or the people that do care just do it out of pity. But like you don't actually mean anything to anyone. You're not important. You don't matter. You're not valuable. You're a failure. So, like, if we can imagine a scenario of, like, I'll use a man. You could easily create one for a woman. And this example could be pretty ambi-gender. But, like, let's say that I guess let's just say that you're someone who, ever since you were a little kid, you've been unsuccessful at everything you did, and, well, no, let's revamp that. Let's say that you went through high school and you did pretty well, but, because most people probably do all right, but when you're in high school, when you're a kid, like, your parents pretty much are in charge of a lot of stuff, and they kind of run a lot of stuff, and most kids have this idea that, like, when they're free and when they're out on their own, they're just gonna dominate, and or they don't think of it that way, but they think that normal is what they're gonna do, and everyone around them is just amazingly sucky, and their parents are amazingly terrible, but they're going to do normal. But they don't realize that normal is actually pretty awesome, and their parents are actually doing pretty well too, and that they're actually going to blow it in all sorts of ways. So let's say you go and you flunk all your classes, and you flunk all your classes, and you flunk all your classes, and then, like, you can't even graduate college, and, like, and your parents, you keep, trying again, but, like, then you don't study and you do bad again, and you're just a letdown, and, you waste your money on stupid stuff and just goofing off, and, you wind up having to get, like, a minimum wage job after, they spent enough money for you to go to college twice over again. And, like, your girlfriend dumps you, then you have to get this other girlfriend who, you have children with her and you're trying to turn things around, and like you try to do better, but then you mess up and you start doing drugs, and you don't even, then you cheat on her, or that you're not even there for your kids, and you like forget when your kid's birthday is, and like, so like you can imagine someone who fails over and over and over again, okay, and they get up and after they've done all these failures, they say, okay, I'm going to stop failing, and I'm going to be a good person and do the right thing. Okay, what is motivating that person? What is motivating that person is achievement. They want to be great. They want to do great things. In other words, the goal of being a good person is the motivation. Okay? And so, essentially, it's this future arrogance. That's why they're getting out of bed. That's why they're turning it over and say, I'm going to be awesome. Okay? And the problem is like, even if you're willing to confess that you messed up, the only motivation to try again to do better is the desire, to be good. Okay? And the more you mess up, then the smaller that trophy is going to be at the end of how awesome, you lived the great life. You lived the awesome life. Look at you. That's what I want to do. I want to live a life of being awesome. And no matter who you are, it's almost inescapable. There's no way you're going to live up to your own dreams, because your dreams are your dreams, and they're what you dreamed that you would do. And so that's your goal. You could have dreamed bigger dreams, and maybe someone else dreamed bigger dreams, but you still had your dreams. It is unlikely that you're going to perfectly follow out your dreams. You're going to mess up somewhere. So no matter who you are, no matter how good you do, you're not going to live up to your dreams. And so this is my point. Like, it's kind of empty. It's kind of shallow to say, like, look at me. Look at how great I am. Look at the great things I've accomplished. And so what we do is we just, I think, I could be wrong about this, but I think what goes on most of the time is people say, they just forget about the past and they sort of try to create a new vision. And all of the times they've been so ashamed of themselves, they just put it behind them. And they don't accept it, they ignore it. And just create a new vision of the awesome me. And live for that. And that's what motivates them. And the thing is, if you're someone who's really, 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 really messed up in life in a big way, and you've got like children who you let down in a big way, then like they're like living reminders of your failure, and so you can't ignore it. And what happens is, or say you've got a drug addiction, then like it's physical in your brain. It keeps coming back to you, and so it's this failure point that you have that you keep doing over and over again. You keep going back into the drug addiction, and so like that will lead to despair and suicide and that sort of thing. Okay, so that's the thing. Like, what if you're not a good-looking woman? What if you're not an accomplished man? Or what if you're not an accomplished man, a woman, or a good-looking man? However you want to swing it. But what if you are nowhere near your dreams? And see, the problem is what we do, we adjust the dream to make it something smaller, and then we just pretend that our bigger dream that we had in the past, we just pretend we didn't have that anymore, and we find ourselves a smaller dream to live for. And we just focus on that, and I'm going to do that with my life, and that's going to make my life meaningful and matter, and I'm going to be an awesome person because look at what I did. And in an extreme example, like you just run out of room to like reshape things. But like if we zoom out and really look at who we are, God says in the Bible that every one of us deserves to go to hell forever. So if we're really honest and really accept our failures, I really wish I'd done things a whole lot differently. And you begin to get this perspective on it. So like, my point is this, at least on this thing. When it comes to what you live for, maybe the goal of what you're living for is not your own personal glory. Maybe it's God's glory. If it's God's glory, then what that means is God's not made more glorious by anything you do. In other words, you're not living to create something that doesn't exist. Rather, God's glory already exists. It's indestructible. It's already there. And so, appreciation and worship for who He is instead of who you are motivates you to do the good things that you do out of worship, out of devotion to someone else, to something else. If that becomes your motivation, then what happens is no amount of failure on your part, no amount of crazy circumstances that come in out and swoop out of nowhere and just mess up what you wanted to do that's not your fault, no amount of anything, whether your fault or whether a natural disaster or some other person who's just a conniving bad person, nothing can destroy what you live for, because you live for God, and God's indestructible. And so that's a radically different perspective. The problem is where we fundamentally live to be awesome. And so I want you to, a way to think of this is like dependent and independent. The problem is we think of God as the number one thing in our life, and then, our family is number two, and our friends is number three, and that sort of thing. And, our personal greatness is in there somewhere, even though we don't like to admit it. Okay. And each of those are independent little gods that we worship. And we have a highest God, and a two God, and a three God, and a four God. So what happens if you become an atheist and you stop believing in God? Well, that only gets rid of God, but it doesn't get rid of all the other things that are really gods that you worship, like family, friends, your personal awesomeness, whatever it is. You still worship those things. So they all just move up a notch because the guy at the top is gone. Whereas a biblical perspective says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That leaves no room for you to love anyone else or anything else. You're only loving God. If you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, you don't love anything else. And so what that means is you only have one God. You only love one thing. Everything's dependent on God. And so your love for other people is not independent of God, and your desire to do good things also in this is not independent of God. Rather, it flows from your love for God. It's dependent, like a tree, and think of God as the tree and everything else as the branches. And so in this situation, if you become an atheist and you erase God, then everything's gone. Everything becomes meaningless. So God becomes the defining factor that everything's about. Everything's about God. Okay? So but that's hard to, keep in mind, but that's an important point, I think. And it's kind of hard to touch on some of what we're talking about here. Now, the thing is, we'll deal with sort of the softball first. The whole does this outfit make me look fat, honey? And okay, so we'll deal with that, as the justification for lying. It's the ultimate. It's the ultimate. Justification. It's the ethical argument. This is basic. This is basic ethical theory that's going on here in all of these. In other words, people have a sense of good and evil, a sense of morality, and the way we refine our sense of morality is vague and unclear and uncertain. And we have some ideas like I shouldn't go around just murdering people willy-nilly. But we're not 100% certain about things. So like what you do is you come up with a moral like you should never lie. And then you do something called thought experiments where you try to think of like a situation where it would be where it would actually be good to lie. Okay? And so that's what's going on here. These are all thought experiments. These are all ethical thought experiments. So like so she asks you, does this make me look fat or that kind of thing? Well, in this situation, this is a false dilemma. What you're being confronted with is a faulty dilemma. And in other words, like, well, does it make me look fat is not really a faulty dilemma, but do I look good in this or bad in this? That is a faulty dilemma. Because the overall character of how you look, good or bad, is not a matter of it doesn't fall into this big either or. It's a little more complicated than that, so like generally speaking, there is a sense in which if a man has sex with you and then you look good to him, like like there is a sense in which like you could say in a sense you could say you definitely look good, but there is another sense in which you could say you can be more detailed. You're like, do you look ravishing? Do you look stunning? Do you look cute? Do you look friendly? Do you look like the girl next door? Like it's a lot more complicated. Like just looking good. Are you a head turner? Are you a head turner in a good way? Are you a head turner in a bad way? Are you shocking? It's more complicated than just good or bad. And then fat and not fat is also a relative concept. Fat compared to who? Fat compared to somebody who has 6% body fat and is about to die. Yeah, you're a fat lard compared to that guy. But like, it's a relative thing. Like, now if you're asking, the thing about being fat is it is a scientific thing. Like you can measure that. It's not that difficult to measure your body fat percentage, and there are healthy ranges. I personally think that kids should learn in school just how to measure that and to know if they're in a healthy body weight or not. That at least just to know that, because it's not really that complicated of a measurement to make. And it's like, why can't you just know that? Why can't you find that out? Like, in other words, like we're already giving kids tests in school all the time to judge their intelligence, and they have to know what other kids got. And I mean, that's difficult enough for them already. I don't think this is going to be the end of the world backbreaker thing for them to also know how fat they are. Like we're already measuring their intelligence, and like tests are not just a measure of intelligence, but also your how well you studied and whether or not you did the homework and stuff. Like, so I mean, school's just full of measuring kids' success. So it's just constant in school, and so like I don't see why kids can't, why people can't know that. But like we do have this situation in our culture where we think of someone being fat or not is completely subjective. It's not objective. It's completely just like, in other words, it's objectively true that the Atlanta Braves won the 1995 World Series. It is subjectively true that chocolate ice cream tastes better than vanilla. It's subjectively true that a hot fudge sundae is better than a caramel sundae. Okay? And in our society, in my experience, people put obesity in the subjective column, but it's really an objective thing at the end of the day. And that gets more complicated into like, there's so much mythology about health and weight loss that like people just have, and there's so much truth about it that people, you know, refuse to accept, you know, and there's also a TMI problem. So if you're trying to lose weight and get in shape, you run into all these problems. And first of all, you try to get information about what to do, and there's like, in the world of good information, there's just, it gets too detailed, and like no one will just break down the simple version. You know, it's like, oh my goodness, this is like telling me like all this stuff. Like, do I really need to know all this? It's like you have to become some sort of, you know, electronics wizard, you know, to navigate this. But on the other end, there's like infinity of false information. This is like amazingly bad information. And there's people who are constantly on TV selling you some sort of way to lose weight, some sort of product or device or machine or a plan, or, you know, prepackaged meals or a pill or some sort of mechanism or device, or there's like some sort of schedule, or there's some sort of trick that doesn't involve you not eating so much at the end of the day. You know, what your grandma always told you, that people are fat because they eat too much, is actually scientifically proven. You know, you can go to the New England Journal of Medicine. If you don't trust me, if you don't trust the New England Journal of Medicine, then you're a pretty bad conspiracy theorist, you know. I knew a guy who told me one time that he worked for a guy who said, this guy, like, he repaired trailers. He was like a contractor that fixed trailers and like mobile homes, you know, and like this guy claimed that he was wealthy from doing it, and he, you know, so he must have not been a complete doofus, but he claimed that he knew how, he had the cure for cancer, and it was in your diet, how you eat, and he had cured cancer, and it's like, okay, well that's eat, you know, like that this is the kind of thing that, you know, gives me a good laugh when I need one, you know? Like, okay, that guy cured cancer. Yeah, right. You know, I think the same person told me, the same guy who knew the guy told me that he knew another guy that, like, could make lawnmowers run on water. I should have had a red flag right there that, like, you know what, this guy might be off his rocker. You gonna make a lawnmower run on water? Like, seriously? Like, you just think about the economics of this. Like, how would they keep this under wraps? Like you know a guy down the road who can do it, and he's got it working. Like, how many more people would be all over the country just doing that? Like, they would just run everything off water. Like, you know. So anyway, huge rabbit trail, I guess. So the New England Journal of Medicine, you know, obesity, blah 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 blah, yada yada. And then of course there's the other problem of like, men are attracted to fat on women, so like, it's not necessarily a bad thing that like you have some fat. Like, that's what makes women soft, you know. And so what I'm saying is, this is a false dilemma. This is a blatant false dilemma of yes, no, good, bad, you know. And it's important to recognize that, like, in my experience with women, and I'm guessing your experience too, they are fully aware of, like, aesthetics and their own image, and they put no small amount of thought into that. And it's not like they're just dum-dums who go, I look good, I look bad. Like, no, women put a little more thought into it than that. You know, they debate it. People are constantly trying to sell them products. They take it very, very seriously. They take it to great detail. So like, it's not like, you know, they don't care. Like, probably I would guess that when a woman asks you that, is she's wanting you to enter into her world of stuff that she's interested in, because she's interested in, you know, the word pretty. You know what I mean? Like, that's a powerful word in my experience to women. That's a powerful word. And so like, and they take it very seriously, you know, in all sorts of different aspects and ways of looking at it. And, you know, men tend to not be as interested in it, but women are super interested in it and they want to share that with you, you know? So, like, I don't know. But at the end of the day, I could promise you this, ladies, if he is having sex with you, you can't be that ugly, you know, because, like, it would be real obvious real fast, you know, if you're a turn off. You know, even if he's like trying to imagine someone else, like there's only so much of that, you know. Like, yeah, and men are not the same. They're all different, and what attracts them is really varied and weird and wild. And so, what any particular man finds the most attractive will probably, in my experience, be unique to that man. But what will have the most mainstream appeal to the widest range of men will probably be the sort of standard models of beauty that, like, you see in magazines and stuff. That will appeal to, like, probably the widest variety of men, but it will not be the most attractive thing to any particular man. A particular man will have some weird thing. Like, I knew this one guy, and we like snooped his computer to see what porn he looked at. And you know, this won't be explicit because it was so weird. It wasn't, the women had clothes on, you know, and they were just laying on the couch in normal pajamas sleeping. And it was called, what was it called? Sleeping Beauties. And they had like their hair done and like makeup on, and they were just laying on the couch sleeping. And he was like, that was his thing, you know. He's not looking at what you're looking at, you know, the images that are shoved in your face of like the model of beauty and that kind of thing. That's not really his thing, you know what I mean? Or like, I had one friend who, like, if a girl smoked weed, then he was attracted to her. And it's not that he like respected her or thought she was cool. Like, he would really be attracted to her because of that, you know. And that was his thing, you know. So we could go into talking about different fetishes that different guys have forever. We're not going to talk about that. But, like, the point is, beauty is complicated, and this is a ridiculous false dilemma. Now, the little white lie is a little bit different situation. What's going on with the little white lie? And actually, I think there was an episode of South Park that, like, did a good job exploring this. When you tell somebody something because that's untrue because you don't want to hurt their feelings, then there's an implicit belief that's behind that that's fairly dangerous, to be completely honest. It's not safe. So the ethics of that, essentially, and we cut right to the chase here. Your view is that you can handle the truth and they can't. There's pride behind it. You know, because pity of other people is linked to pride. That's the thing. That's the problem. That's the distinction between love and pity. So, like, oh, they can't handle the truth, but oh, I can. You know, I pity them, you know, in their situation. When you pity someone, that's linked to pride. And the link comes in when the real problem with pity, I mean, having pity for someone isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it clearly is a bad thing when you don't want that person to come out of their pitiful situation into a situation that's equal to or better than yours. So, the point is, what's ethically wrong is when you think that you're better than someone else, or that you are superior to that person, because it's unlikely, and the real reason is because you're lying to yourself. Yeah, I mean, in other words, like, you may be better able to handle the truth than someone else, you know, because not everyone's the same. You know, all men are not created equal. And people are in different stages in life, going through different things, and everyone has different weaknesses and strengths, even psychologically different weaknesses and strengths. And certain people have certain things that they just struggle with, that you may not struggle with. But, like, here's the thing, like, making the judgment call that like you know someone else well enough to know that that's that can that's a very, very difficult judgment to make. You know, I'm not saying that like you could never know, but that's a very difficult judgment to make. The pity comes in when you don't want that person to grow and get past that. When you don't have any hope for that person. You see, the problem is most of us are really good at identifying other people's faults, but we turn other people's weaknesses and faults. Well, I would say that we're not as good as we think we are, but we do have a strong sense of it, and I mean that's important to navigate life. You have to get along with people, and you got to know, what people are like to know how to deal with them. But the problem is other people's faults. We recognize other people's faults, and our immediate reaction is to, well, I'm better than them. And then you actually don't want them to overcome that. So let's say that you've got some friend who is inferior to you in all sorts of ways. Let's say that friend makes less money than you, is dumber than you. It has all kinds of mental problems where they have anger issues, or maybe they lie a lot. Or maybe just the list is full. And let's say that they're super out of shape and overweight too. Okay, and let's say that person decides to go exercise and get in shape, and they actually do it. They still got all the other problems. Are you jealous? Are you competitive? Do you want them not to succeed at this? Why? Pride. Pity for that person was rooted in pride. If you don't want that person to change and overcome that. And again, it goes back to the pride issue like we talked about. Who are you living for? Your own personal greatness or God's greatness? Because if it's all about God, then nothing they do will compare to God. And because of how great God is, you want to see other people become more like God. Even if you fail at it, you still want them to do well. That's the Christian ethic. That's where love flows from. Like, I want them to do well because of God. Okay? Even if I don't. Even if I'm a failure. Even if I am going to fail out of school and I'm doing this project with you and I've been assigned to you this project and I'm failing all my classes, I still will have joy that you guys do well in this project. And I'm going to work hard to make sure that I do my job here. Why? Because I love you. So you get the idea. So let's say that someone, has demonstrated to you over and over again that they have a hard time accepting certain facts, certain truths. We all have to deal with that every day. And so it becomes easier sometimes to just lie to that person and tell that person, what they want to hear. Well, the Bible doesn't just say, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And by the way, this is from Deuteronomy. And of course, Jesus quotes it, but it's from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy, Deuteros Nomos, second law. So it's the second telling of the Jewish law. It's like the Jewish law repeated over again, and sort of like commentary on the laws that have been given up to that point. And so this is sort of commentary on the Ten Commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. First commandment. Second commandment, love your neighbor as yourself. And I believe that's actually, Jesus pulls that from a minor prophet. I don't remember which one. But we all know that Jesus, says that's the second commandment. I believe this comes when the Pharisees come with the trick question about should you pay your taxes to Caesar or not. And then the Sadducees see that he answers well, so they come to him with a question. And then someone else sees that he answered both of them well, so he comes to Jesus with this question: which is the greatest commandment? And Jesus answers, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is the greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbor as yourself. In other words, that's a good model for like this little white lie thing. That's a good rule of thumb. Love your neighbor as yourself. And the teacher responds to Jesus and says, I think it's in Luke. He says, well, you have spoken rightly. And then he repeats what he says, and this is is more blessed than to give burnt offerings and all this. And Jesus says, you are not far from the kingdom of God. So here's the thing. The love your neighbor as yourself. If it was you who was in a bad situation and could not accept the truth, what would you want people to do for you? How would you want to be treated in that situation? So let's say that there's some truth that you are not accepting very well. What would you want people to say to you? How would you want to be treated? Well, looking at myself from the outside, I can say that I'm messed up and I want to get right. Of course, if I wouldn't say that as that person. I would think that I was right. So I need to give an example. Let's say that let's use fat again. Let's say that you're amazingly overweight, and just hopefully you're not amazingly overweight, so that you can imagine if you were. Just pretend that you were, but hopefully you're not, so that you can use your imagination. You might have to think of a different example. There's numerous examples, but let's just use that one. Let's say that you're so overweight that you're probably you're spending $50 a day on food, and there are people who do that. That's a real thing. If you don't know, who just have a severe food addiction. I saw this one woman, and it was a thing about these people who were morbidly obese, which means to the point that they were going to die, and it was like a documentary, and they started with this black fella in New York who wouldn't get out of the bed, and he would lower a bucket out the window with food, and in New York City they'll deliver anything. He had money in the bucket, and they take the money and put the food, and he'd hoist it back up and eat it. And he had oxygen tubes to his nose because he'd die without them because there was so much fat in his body pressing on his lungs, and he couldn't fully inhale. And the whole documentary, what they did was cook all the food that the person eats in a day so they can see how much they eat in a day, because they're eating themselves to death. And they would put it on a table, and this guy, he actually stood up and walked when he smelled that food, and then he pulled it to him instead of slide. He couldn't slide up to the table. He had to pull the table to himself because he weighed much more than the table. Another guy was an English guy on there, and he had they showed his entire diet for what he ate a day. And if you think about how many candy bars you might eat in a day as a normal person, this guy, the candy bar section of his diet was the same as your candy bar. It was that same percentage. The same proportionally, it was the same. Except for him, it was $30 worth of candy bars a day. And then the woman who ate the most, this woman, she ate the most calories. She wasn't as big as some of the other people because she hadn't been on the road as long enough. She actually ate 15,000 calories a day. And she had 3 pounds of M&Ms a day. A day. 3 pounds. And so the thing is, they don't eat it all at once. They don't realize how much they eat. They just go and get some more, get some more, get some more, later. And so they showed her like ritual of going to bed, and she couldn't go to bed every night unless she had like 2 sort of Little Debbie Hostess cakes, Twinkie type things, moon pie things. She couldn't go to bed at night without 2 of them. She said she just couldn't fall asleep. That helped her fall asleep. And the funniest thing is, she washed it down with a Diet Coke. A Diet Coke, really? You eat 3 pounds of M&Ms a day, 15,000 calories a day. The question is, and I had my friend ask this question, but he had the right question. The question is who? Who are you fooling? Like who are you fooling? That's what he said. Not why are you doing that, or what do you think you're doing, but who? Who exactly is it that you're fooling? Yourself. And of course we can be harsh with her, because she's on the other end of the TV screen and we can hear her, but she can't hear us, kind of thing. But I want you to imagine that you were her, and you had this problem. In her situation, she is so addicted to food that, like, you can't just come out and just tell her everything you think. She has just made up her mind that, like, what she's doing is a great idea, but it's actually not a great idea. So, like, let's say that you were someone like that, where you couldn't handle the truth, but it was an important truth that you needed to know, and you couldn't handle it. Well, okay, what would you want someone to do for you? Someone that loved you, someone that cared about you. You would want them to try to help you with your problem that you can't admit. Well, what are they going to do to help you? Well, they're not going to just tell you the truth, are they? No, this is the point, and this is the important point. Telling the truth is actually not an either-or situation. Some people will get the wrong idea no matter what you tell them, because they are irrational, especially, and everyone's irrational about some subject, about some situation, about some problem. They're mixed up, they have the wrong idea, they've got all kinds of lies that they bought into that back it up. They got twisted reasoning, they're hard-headed, whatever it is. So this is my point. If you say tell the truth yes, tell the truth no, those are my only options, what you're leaving out is the whole world of persuasion. Persuasion, persuasive speech, is not really telling the truth, not really not telling the truth. It's, in other words, like, I could tell this woman the truth, and she won't, the reality of in other words, what is communication? It's when an idea exists in my soul, and I translate it into a physical medium of words on a page or sound vibrations in the air. It's received through her eyes or through her ears, and then her brain translates it back into intangible, non-physical ideas. And the ideas that were in my brain go through the physical medium, and then they transfer back to the spiritual medium of just ideas in her mind. Okay? But that doesn't always work. And you can put it out there, and she won't receive the truth. She won't get it. And so sometimes telling someone the truth is a process. I know there have been many situations in my life where it was hard. There were hard lessons for me to learn, hard truths for me to learn. I'm glad that I learned them, but someone just telling me right off the bat wouldn't accomplish the goal of me learning the truth. God is patient with us like that. He lets us know things that we need to hear. Now, this is a very touchy subject, and this is a very difficult subject. What you need to be careful about is you need to recognize that it's important for you to respect this person like they're you. And so don't come into a situation. The problem is you can come into every situation with every person and think that you're God,
and you're going to fix everyone. And that's not loving your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You're not God. Okay? Last I checked, you're not God. Okay? So, as much as it's important to, kind of have a plan for how you're going to convince somebody of the truth, you don't want to put yourself, to play God with that situation and sort of manage someone's thoughts. And so it's important to see them as your equal and try to put yourself in their shoes. So you don't want to slow things down so much and be so carefully planned like you're just managing the other person, because again, there's that pride thing coming back. But at the same time, you do want to think about it as though you're them and how you would want to be treated. And there are certain things that it would be best, not to say. So, like, I might not want someone to lie to me, but I might want someone to be patient with my nonsense. But work on it. You see how that works? So, like, yeah, I don't want people to go around lying to me. What? No. I don't. So you might want to think about it this way. Push the envelope. Push the person to, accept as much as they can. And don't underestimate their ability to exceed your expectations. Does that mean telling somebody a little white lie? I would say, if your goal is for someone to get the wrong idea, then you got the wrong goal, and that's lying. But if your goal is to get them to get the right idea, then that's not lying. So as long as the motivation's right, the actions will be right. But don't underestimate people. One thing I've learned in my experience is the incredible value of autistic people. I've seen situations where I had a situation where a friend of mine was getting married the next day, and he had a new house and a dog in the backyard, and he was really excited, and he wanted to show us his dog, and the dog was just really scared of all these people that he'd never seen before, and he was kind of like freaking out, and he was a guy that would like freak out sometimes, and he was a little bit crazy, a little bit wild, and people were like, "What's up with this guy?" And he was just real upset that the dog was scared of everyone. He wanted the dog to be friendly and love on everybody, and the dog was just scared of us. And so he grabbed the dog and just started punching it in the face. And like all of us went into like oh no mode, like whoa, like he's getting married tomorrow, just got this house, and like he's freaking out on this dog. And we were all being very careful, like, okay, we've got to convince this guy not to do this. This is going to be a hard truth for him to accept, but like we can't allow this to go on, But like we were carefully, not even saying anything, just like waiting for him to calm down just a bit, and then maybe like we could work in something, And there was one of my friends there. He's got some mild autism, and like autistic people they can't really. Their social skills, they don't really have many social skills, and their toolbox of social skills is just very limited, and that's the autism, right? And sometimes that's a good thing, because the rest of us have so many social skills that we're just like looking at our toolbox for the right tool for how to handle a difficult situation. And he literally just walked up to the guy and he was just like, "Hey, don't hit him in the face so much." Just like that. Just like that. This guy's freaking out, getting married tomorrow, just bought a house, and he's punching his dog because the dog's scared. Punch him in the face. And the autistic guy just comes up and says, "Hey, don't punch him in the face so much." Just like that. And you think like this is gonna, I was immediately thinking that was gonna cause like a bigger freak out moment, you know? Like you can't say that, you know, he can't handle that, you know? You've got to break it to him more gently, you know, kind of thing. But no, it worked. Like he just like said, "Oh, really?" He looked at him and he's like, "Yeah, that makes him scared when you do that." That's this. I'm giving you the real conversation. Oh, okay. And like, and then I finally chimed in. I was like, "Yeah, give him a second. Maybe maybe he'll calm down." You know, because like dogs just kind of need a minute. You know, it's gonna take time to like get the dog to like chill. Like it's your new dog. You know. It was just crazy, the whole situation. But I learned something that day. Don't underestimate people's ability to accept a hard truth, you know, faster than you think. But as long as your goal is to, you know, break the truth to them, then you got the right goal. Now, let's look at one other situation. This situation doesn't really have to do with justifying lying, but it's an interesting situation to think about. The lie of omission. The lie of omission. The example I'm thinking of is kind of personal. Is people that like I know. It's kind of, but it's a good example. Well, essentially, let's just give the basic definition. What is a lie of omission? Here's a good example. This will kind of define it for you. Let's say that you are a psychopath. You are a serial killer psychopath. You are a crazy person. And you know, rape and kill everybody that you can. And so, like, for example, there was one psychopath who lived in the early 1900s, and he only murdered mentally handicapped people and black people. And you would think, like, well, why did he do that? You know? Well, you've got to think like a psychopath. And a psychopath wouldn't be racist or hate mentally handicapped people. Like, a psychopath doesn't, a true one, a tier 1, there's primary psychopaths and there's secondary. So for primaries, it's just that they're just purely psychopathic. Whereas for secondary psychopaths, they have psychopathic traits that flow from some other mental disorder. So it's secondary to the other thing. But like a primary psychopath like this, like a full-blown serial killer, like he doesn't experience pride or joy or hatred or sadness or love or any of that. Like he doesn't care. And the life for this person is kind of like, so like murdering someone for someone like that is like playing whack-a-mole or like playing Mario. You know, it's like, ooh, got it. You know, it's just like a game. You know, it's just like a simple thing. And like they don't experience, it's not a big deal to murder somebody. So like he's not murdering these people because he's racist or something. But in that day and age, his goal, he can murder like hundreds of people or something. It was crazy. But like his goal was, he figured these are people that society doesn't care about, and so they won't be missed. And then I'll be able to murder more. You know, that's how the psychopath thinks. The full blown, you know. And so these people tend to be real sure that they're smarter than everyone else, and they think that like the morals that other people have, I mean, they think other people's morality is like a weakness, and they're real sure that this makes them better than everybody else. Now, if they're a secondary psychopath, they can have a lot of these traits, but they can, like, for example, then they can take great pride in their lack of morals and think that makes them better than everybody else, you know, and that sort of thing. But the reason I bring up this example is the psychopathic serial killer, their biggest lie that they tell is one that they never have to actually tell. It's a lie of omission. The biggest lie that this person tells is that he's not a serial killer. But no one ever asks you, are you a serial killer? Because most of the time in life, people assume that things are normal. Because that's rational. It's rational to assume normal. Why wouldn't you assume that people are normal? Like, what else would you assume? In other words, you have to make assumptions in life. I had a kid, a teenager, who told me that like he just affirmed that he never makes assumptions, and he always does things, he knows what he's doing, and he never assumes anything, and he always knows for a fact with certainty. He has knowledge. He doesn't act without knowledge. He does not make assumptions. Like people like that make assumptions. And I said, there's no way, you can live life like that. That's existentially unlivable. In other words, like, you are confronted with situations where, all the time, where you don't really know. So, like, the example I gave to him is I said, you're going to go get in your car and put the key in there and crank it. And you're not going to pop the hood and check to see if Nazis hadn't come by and cut the wires from your distributor cap. I can promise you, if those wires are cut, turning the key is a truly pointless endeavor. But you're just going to assume that didn't happen. Why? Because that's unlikely to have happened. In other words, we have to live life based on probabilities a lot of the time. And it's likely that most people are normal. So you just assume people are normal. But random strangers you come across might actually not be normal. You don't know that they're not serial killers. You just assume that they're not on the basis of, normal probabilities. This kid, he told me, he just affirmed that, like, I was wrong and that he never makes assumptions. And so then a funny thing happened. There was like yogurt cups around, and like people had been eating yogurt, and there were like just yogurt cups on the tables, and these people didn't even hear our conversation, and they just said, hey, and they threw him one of the yogurt cups, and it was open, so it looked like it was just an empty yogurt cup, and he grabbed it and just caught it, but he squeezed it when he caught it, and it was actually full of yogurt, and when it just like shot all over him, and it was just like, and I said, well, you assumed that there was no yogurt in the cup, didn't you? And then he like had nothing to say because he was covered with the yogurt, But like, I knew another teenage girl, and this was her attitude. She like, when a car came down the road, you don't know who that person is on the other side of the yellow line, and with a simple flick of their wrist to the left, they could kill you. They could be some crazy person who just wants to commit suicide right now and wants to smash into you. You ride by absolute strangers, exceeding the speed limit all the time, and you're just making an assumption that that person's probably not crazy, but you don't know. It could be. You're just assuming. It's a wise assumption. It's a reasonable assumption. But life can't be lived without doing things that you don't know for a fact. You can't live without basing your actions on things that you don't know for sure are true. Those are just some examples. We could give way more examples. Epistemological, 100% absolute logical certainty is actually, there's only a few situations where you actually have that. I think the proof for God's existence is one of those. But like, the Pythagorean theorem is true. You can give the mathematical proof for that, but there's you can't really prove beyond the shadow of a doubt all sorts of things. So you just kind of have to assume in all sorts of situations. You got to make assumptions, even about other people. We get offended when people make assumptions about us, but like in reality, that's all we ever do is make assumptions about other people. You can never know with absolute certainty exactly how to treat someone. You just have to make your best guess based on your best probabilities. So, there are extreme situations where you can be pretty sure, but like you're always going to be confronted with situations where it's a bit iffy, and you have to do that. But like the point I'm making here is a lie of omission is when you don't correct someone's assumptions. That's when a lie of omission occurs. In life, all the time, people are making assumptions, and they have to. Life is existentially unlivable without constantly making assumptions. And so, in other words, when someone thinks that things are a certain way, but they're not that way, they don't know that it's not that way. In other words, like, you see a guy over there, a random person, let's say you're in Walmart, and you just walk by a random stranger you never met in your life. You assume that person's not a serial killer. You don't know that person's not a serial killer, but you just assume it. Okay? That person, I believe, is morally obligated to let you know that, like, yeah, I'm a serial killer. I've serial killed, 30 people. If he doesn't tell you that he's a serial killer, then he's lying to you. Why? Because he's not correcting your false assumption. You've made an assumption, a rational assumption, based on most people aren't serial killers. So that's rational. It's rational to assume that things are normal. If it wasn't, then we would have to change our definition of normal. But normal is just how things normally go, and it's rational to assume that things are normal unless told otherwise. But if he's actually a serial killer, then your assumption is wrong. You've made an assumption that's maybe rational and would make sense, but in this situation you're wrong. You've made a bad assumption. He actually is a serial killer, and so if he doesn't tell you, then he's a liar. And so we can think there's all sorts of situations like that where someone needs to know something, and you know that they're making an incorrect assumption, and you should tell them, but you don't. That's a lie of omission. But judging when you make a lie of omission and when you're not can be difficult. Because, if you're a psychopath, then yeah, you should turn yourself in. It's immoral for you to not, at least people ought to know that you're a psychopath. You shouldn't keep that secret, right? You're a liar by keeping that secret. But let's say that you watched, a TV show today. Let's say you watch Pokemon on Tuesday. You don't tell anyone. You keep that secret. You take it to the grave. You don't even remember it next week. Are you a liar? No. That's not a lie of omission. Why? Well, because there's no assumption that people are making that you really have a responsibility to correct on that. We say it's none of their business. But if you're a psychopath and you've just randomly killed 30 people just for the fun of it, and you don't even care who they are, just for the fun of it, then that's other people's business. So this gets complicated, because in other words, what we're talking about is people are making assumptions all the time. And sometimes you have a responsibility to correct someone's false assumption. When? Which people? How often? Which assumptions? What assumptions are people making? Maybe it's not my responsibility to correct their dumb ideas. Huh? It gets complicated. It gets even more complicated. What if people have the wrong idea about you, and they label you and judge you and ridicule you, and they call you a loser and you're uncool and you're not part of the in club? But what if you're actually cool and awesome and they should like you? Should you correct their false assumption, or should you let them have their false assumption? You see how complicated this gets? I would say in that situation, put the truth out there where, they can accept it, but it's not your job to control what other people think. You say, now wait a minute, Ben, in that other situation, you were trying to break the truth to someone gently. Yeah. But that's not really any different from what I'm talking about here. You put the truth out there in such a way where it's available to them, but you're not going to control what they think. It's vital that you allow someone to have autonomy over what their own thoughts are, and you're not going to manage other people's thoughts for them. And I remember that's why I was talking about that before. It's so dangerous where you start saying, "Oh, that person's got the wrong idea about that. I'm going to fix that person." There's a fine line between that and between correcting what everyone thinks about you and making sure everyone thinks you're cool and awesome. Let people think what they want to think, even if it's stupid. Make the truth available, which means sometimes working with their nonsense, putting it in a way where it can work through their nonsense, but don't shove the truth down their throat. Don't try to control what people think. Let them believe what they want to believe. And if they want to believe a lie, just make sure it's not your fault. Yeah. As Paul would say, he had a clear conscience when it came, to spreading the gospel, and that he was not guilty on that account for anyone, because he made sure that he made that clear to everyone, so that if anyone rejected it, it sure wasn't Paul's fault that they rejected the gospel. He wasn't going to make people accept Jesus. He was going to make sure that if they rejected Jesus, it was not his fault. And then he let them have it, whatever it is. So that all of this is complicated. Lying. Lies of omission can be difficult. It's difficult to know when exactly someone needs to know something and when they don't. And then saying that something is, none of someone else's business can become a sort of a prideful thing too. Oh, well, they don't need to know that, so there's no point in, that's none of their business. Becomes a justification for keeping secrets that can be pride based. Those are unimportant people, and they don't need to know. Who are you to say that? Maybe you're the unimportant person that doesn't need to know. Maybe they're the one that needs to know. So there's a lot there. Intentionally misleading people is one thing. Lies of omission are another. There's always going to be a gray area between, did you watch Pokemon on Tuesday and you're a serial killer. But, as long as you eat cereal for breakfast every morning, you'll be fine. And, there are some lies like that one I just told. Like, that's a lie. Like, you're not going to be fine if you eat cereal for breakfast every morning. But in that case, it's complicated, right? It's a toolbox of communication skills. That's so absurd that it's obviously absurd, and so it's not my responsibility to, I'm assuming that I know that you're smart enough to know that that wasn't meant to be true, because it's facetious, right? And that's how sarcasm works. You say things that aren't true because you know that the other person is smart enough to know that it's not true, and it's kind of a coy way of making a point. And so sometimes you do that with people. Like, it's a way of making a more complicated point. Sometimes lying, when you know that the person is not going to believe the lie, is a way of making a more complicated point. So, like, for example, it's important in comedy, but sometimes you can make deeper points that way. So, like, for example, in the O.J. Simpson trial that happened in the 90s, it was like it was constantly on TV all the time. It seemed like everyone went home and just watched it. And, of course, he was found innocent. And on Saturday Night Live at the time, there was this guy named Norm Macdonald who did the Weekend Update news thing. And at that point in time, Saturday Night Live was really, really bad. Will Ferrell was on there with that Sherry O'Terry, and they did the cheerleaders thing. Tim Meadows was on there. There was some other guy, I forget. He was called Monkey Boy. It was some kind of weird gay thing, but like, this was like right after Adam Sandler and the guys in Chris Farley and David Spade left, and they were kind of like sort of the main guys in like the mid 90s, and so you move into the late like 96, 97 ish, and it was just not a funny show. And this was the first time in my life I had to accept, like, this show was not that funny. I'd grown up as a little kid, like, this is the funniest show ever, and like it was a battle for me to stay awake on Saturday night because I could barely do it to watch it, you know. And I would pass out during it, you know, but I thought it was so funny. Well, like by the time I was 16, I was staying up to watch it pretty regularly, and I realized, like, this is terrible. This is awful. All of this is awful. But I recognized, like, there was one thing on there that was consistently funny, and it was Norm Macdonald. He would tell these jokes, and so, like, when the OJ verdict came in, I was at school. I don't remember what day of the week it was, but we were in class, and like one kid had like a handheld TV thing, and which was like super expensive at the time. It had like a huge antenna on it, and I was just thinking, I was like, man, what is Norm going to say about this? And I think there was a sense of expectation. We were all waiting for Norm to say something about it, because he had just been ragging and 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 ragging on the OJ case and how ridiculous of a farce it was of justice. And so finally Saturday came, and he got to it, and like OJ's face flashes up on the screen, and he goes, "Well, it's official, folks. Murder is now legal in the state of California." Which is not true. That's a lie. It's not a lie. It's just something he said that wasn't true. Well, he knows that we all know, so he can read all of our minds, I guess. But he knows that we all know that it's not true. And that's the difficulty with comedy. You always have to take shots from people that just don't get the joke. And that was what, you know, Norm was good at, was like knowing people. And he could say things that he knew would offend them, and he would like intentionally offend people on there and then make them laugh. You know, and that was his whole, like, that was, you know, his skill. He could like say something that like would straight up offend you and then still make you laugh. You know, and it's like, that's how well he knows you. You know what I mean? That's how well he can work you. You know, so like the OJ thing, you know, of course murder's not legal in California, but he's making a deeper point, you know, and sometimes lying and sarcasm is a way of making a deeper point like that. And so we've touched on a whole lot of stuff, and I feel like we haven't answered everything, but if the undergirding principle is love for the other person, then and it's real, genuine love, and it's not, you know, just that fake pity, then I think you'll be fine. You know, because like even that example where you're making that point about OJ, if Norm's intention in making that joke about OJ is like to teach us something important that we need to understand, then, you know, good for him, you know. But like, that's how all of this works together. So anyway, I'm going to stop there because I've rambled for a fantastically long time about a whole bunch of things. I hope it was as, you know, as good for me as it was. I mean, for everyone else as it was for me. I hope it was good for you as it was for me. No. I hope it was as good for me as it was for you. Anyway. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye. It wouldn't be prudent if we didn't talk about one other thing. So I listened to all of that I just rambled on 2 times, and then I realized, like, there's one thing we have to do. No, I'm not going to answer every question about lying, but there's one thing, nor do I have the answer, you know, but there's one thing we got to talk about, and it's this utilitarian question. The question of whether or not the ends justify the means, because it's very relevant to the question of lying and telling lies. So The example I gave earlier was like in World War II, some of the earliest computers had broken like Nazi codes. This is a plot to a movie. I don't know if this actually happened. I just saw this movie about it, but it's not important whether or not it actually happened when it comes to the question of ethics. We can just imagine, well, what if that did happen? You know, where okay, so what they did was they didn't want the Nazis to find out that they had broken the Nazi code, so sometimes they had to intentionally send their own ships to get sunk, you know. But it's the only way to win the war and stop the Nazis, so it's you know, even though we're basically killing these people, we're sending them to their death intentionally, and our mission would be unsuccessful if they weren't, you know, sunk and killed and captured, you know, because that's how you want the Nazis to not catch on and to think this is like an honest loss or something. Another example given to me by someone, I hate to say it, but it's like a pastor. Someone you know I'd respect. You know, we were talking about the question of lying, and he actually brought up this scenario, another World War II scenario, and he said, okay, you're in Nazi Germany, and you are hiding Jews in your attic, or something like that. You're hiding Jews, and the Gestapo comes, and they ask you, do you have any Jews here? And so, like, if you say yes, they're going to take them away and kill them. So he said that you should say no. He said that lying was justified in that case. So again, he's taking a utilitarian perspective. He's saying this is a results-based morality. This is a morality that says it's not about doing the right thing. It's about achieving the proper outcome. Now, the issue is from an atheist perspective, utilitarianism does make sense, at least in some situations. So, like in the situation of the Nazis with the Jews in the attic, like that's the utilitarian answer, and it makes sense in that situation. That's just doing the best you can. You know, who cares about doing the right thing? It's just achieving the good outcome. Utilitarianism might make less sense from an atheist perspective when the problem with utilitarianism for atheists is that humans don't always know what the outcome will be, and so if they do something immoral to achieve a good outcome, what if you don't achieve the good outcome? So for example, in the movie Star Trek V, the final, I forgot what it's called. The final something. It's the one where they think they're going to meet God, but they're not really. Spock's brother comes. It's got a good message. I like Star Trek V. But anyway, in the story you have the doctor McCoy. I couldn't think of his name. Dr. McCoy, and he like remembers this time in his past when his father was dying of a terrible, terrible disease. And his father was pleading with him to like pull the plug and take him off the machines and just, you know, or kill me, you know. And his doctor's like, it's his son who's his doctor, and he's like, I can't do that. I took an oath to never take a life. I'm a doctor. But it's his father, you know. Doesn't this go, you know, before that oath? You know, I'm your dad, you know, and I want you to do it for me. And he doesn't want to see his dad suffering, and so he pulls the plug because he's saying it's a better result, even though it's wrong to, you know, even though you took an oath to, you know, to never take a life, and even though you're actually technically you're killing the guy. I think he gives him some injection to kill him, which is you're murdering someone. The ends justify the means is the idea, like, well, it's worth it because the outcome is better overall, because those would have been, a little bit longer of suffering, and we wouldn't have been able to save them. And so then shortly after that, it turns out that they found a cure, a full-blown cure, not just something to help it be better, but actual cure. And so McCoy, there's like no way he could have, known that kind of thing. Well, I would say, from an atheist perspective, if there is no God, I would say, like, it still makes sense, like, to kill him, just because it's unlikely. You shouldn't, count on the cure. You're going to have to in other words, you're going to have to make an assumption, like we talked about earlier. You're always going to have to make an assumption based on the best information that you have, and you can't be faulted for not expecting that some radically unlikely thing will happen and you'll find a cure, But utilitarianism, has larger implications. So for example, there are philosophers and ethical philosophers like who at universities, I think Peter Singer is the one that always makes the news, but I think there's other ones. Essentially, they would say, why don't we just kill all Down syndrome children? I think he actually said that a Down syndrome child is of no more value than a pig. And so and also utilitarianism is what motivated the Nazis, right? They thought that evil is justified because of some greater good. And in their case, they were a racist form of fascist, where they really believed that they were doing evil deeds, but because it benefited their superior race, it was okay. That justified all sorts of horrific things, and that was how they justified, what they did, because they were like super racist. So here's the question. Utilitarianism, well, before we move on to the real crux of the matter, utilitarianism, I mean, you get the point. Like the Ku Klux Klan supported, in the early 1900s, supported sterilizing people who they thought, and I think that's how Planned Parenthood started. Like, anyone who's not smart enough, let's get them snipped or get their tubes tied so that they can't have babies, and then we will evolve a better human race. And you say, well, that's wrong. People have a right to, do what they want. And so there's this dichotomy between safety and freedom. And so the thing about utilitarianism is atheists can't really get away from it too much. I mean, the best they can do is say, like, so for example, if you get into, something that's real crazy, like killing all Down syndrome babies, you begin to ask, like, well, maybe it would be better, who's to say that would really make the world a better place? That they could play that game of saying it's unlikely, we don't really know what will happen. But I still think you could play a probability assessment and like, here's the issue. Safety is always at odds with freedom and with a variety of things. So voting, for example, is unsafe. Like, if we allow the average person to vote, then we wind up with like Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump. Like, who wants these two people to be president? Freedom of speech is dangerous. So freedom of religion is dangerous, because that's how crazy cults get started. Like the Jonestown cult, where they all drank the Kool-Aid and died, and like, don't allow crazy, dangerous cults into your place. And so, for example, in France, where they have 3% church attendance, atheist congressmen, they don't allow Scientology into their country because they say it's a dangerous cult. You know what else they don't allow into their country? Baptists. Because they say it's a dangerous cult.
But from an atheistic perspective, at the very least, it makes sense, to not allow Scientology in. I saw this documentary about it where they were having all these legal battles with Scientologists, and what he said was, the whole thing is America's fault because in America, under the First Amendment, anything goes, and you guys just let anything go. Y'all don't. In other words, he condemned America because we don't protect people from dangerous religions, and it's unsafe, and the government's not doing its job of protecting people. Whereas, but you're taking away people's right to believe what they want to believe, and they can't organize and just have this belief. You're going to ban this religion. It's just a belief. You're going to have thought police. Well, they would say the ends justify the means. Some thoughts are too dangerous, and so even though it's wrong to tell people what to think, we understand that's fundamentally immoral. In this case, it's okay because the ends justify the means, because we can't have Scientology popping up or Southern Baptist popping up in France. Okay, so this is the point. I think it's clear that if there is no God, if atheism's true and there's no God, then a utilitarian perspective on things makes sense, and it would make sense to lie to the Gestapo. It would make sense to ban certain religions. It would make sense to, the level of freedom that we have isn't very safe. It's unclear, so for example, we could take away gun rights and say everyone's safer now, but that's a little bit unclear. We might be safer if everybody has guns. But there are instances where we can definitely say that this is dangerous, and we know that if we do this immoral thing, it'll make things safer. And so when those instances come up, I can't really see an atheistic justification for just doing what is right, no matter what. One of the classic examples is like a young Hitler is about to get squashed by a tree in the forest. Do you yell, "Hey, move"? That's sort of the question. Another example, a classic example is, let's say you're a doctor and you have a patient, and the patient can live, I don't know, the patient can only live 2 more years, but he's a young man of 21. He can only live 2 more years because he has some sort of problem in his brain. And let's say that he has 5 perfectly good organs, and there's nothing wrong with these 5 organs. And so let's say down the hall you have 5 people who are also 21, who all they need is those organs, and they'll be fine if they just get those organs of his. But they're only going to make it a month tops. Do you go ahead and kill him and harvest those organs? And you could say, well, the ends justify the means. 60 years for each of them outweighs his 2 years of suffering with his brain problem. That's a utilitarian situation, where you can feel confident enough, not 100% certain, but confident enough that this is what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen. We know that this is the right thing. And this definitely applies to lying. Should we lie to hide the Jews in our attic? If we have broken the Nazi code, should we lie and send some Americans to their death and British to their death just to, lie and the end justify the means because we got to stop the Nazis. I would say from an atheistic perspective, it makes sense. Utilitarianism makes sense. The only way you can really, combat it from an atheistic perspective is when you could say, well, we don't know what would happen. We don't know that, if we just don't know enough and we can't say that there's much likelihood of what will happen if we do this, and we don't know that we're actually achieving the good result, then yeah, you can't really justify it. But if
you feel fairly confident that you can pull it off, you know, like with the doctor there, he's got the patients down the hall. He's fairly confident, you know. Let's say that they've got diseases, and like we've done enough studies on the diseases that everyone has. We know enough about it. We don't know everything there is to know about the human body, you know, and who knows, there may be some wacky thing may happen, you know, because in quantum mechanics of physics, any particle has an infinitesimally low probability that it can be anywhere in the universe. So it actually is scientifically possible that he may turn into, you know, a glass of wine. You know, that's actually scientifically possible. It's just amazingly low probability. So quantum mechanics is the study of like the stuff down to like the atomic level, like, you know, like atoms and protons and neutrons, like small quantum particles, and like they don't go from A to B. They don't really like exist in any particular location. There's just a probability curve of where they are, and so like there's a location of really high probability, and then as you move out to other locations you get lower probability. But like this is basic quantum mechanics. There's always a non-zero probability that any quantum particle in the universe will be anywhere else in the universe. So like it is scientifically possible that Jesus turned the water into wine, but it's incredibly unlikely according to quantum mechanics. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. But like you get the idea. Like we, you know, with these medical studies with these diseases, you know, it's not like we have no knowledge about this. Even if we don't know for sure what will happen if we kill the guy and harvest his organs and do the transplants. But like, I mean, we never know what'll happen when we do the transplants anyway. We're just taking a risk on it, you know, but we feel fairly confident, you know, we're playing the odds. So these come up, you know, they do these a lot in Batman stories. If you read, you know, DC Comics, or you look at the cartoons, or you look at the live action movies. So in The Dark Knight, you know, in other words, in Batman stories, the Joker's always giving you these utilitarian dilemmas. And that's his thing. Like, he always does that. You know, that, like, he's doing that in the cartoons when I was, like, a kid. I was watching the same ones. You know, where he's trying to get Batman to forsake his morals because he's created a dilemma where it's A or B, and either one's bad. So, you know, the dilemma, like, you're going to let this guy live 2 more years, struggle, and then these other 5 people are going to die. Or you're going to do another bad thing and kill him, kill a person, just so you can harvest his organs. And so which are you going to take? And so in the Batman stories, the Joker's always trying to get people to take these utilitarian dilemmas. He's setting them up to, you know, like, make Batman do something bad, corrupt Batman, you know. So, and, you know, if Batman, I would argue that without God in the paradigm, without God in the worldview, I don't see how Batman really, what justification he has for not, you know, giving in to the Joker. The only thing is, like, what Batman always banks on is that, like, the Joker has made a mistake that he can exploit somehow, and, like, he can defeat the Joker because the Joker, you know, doesn't control the results, and he hasn't really, the dilemma isn't real, and there's really a third option. You know, I mean, a lot of stories you're faced with dilemmas, and you have to find that third option. A lot of movies, Star Trek's always doing that, you know. So, same thing with Star Wars, right? Luke Skywalker is there with the Emperor, and the lightsaber's there, and he wants to do the right thing and, like, turn his get his father to turn to good, you know. Or he can do something wrong, and if he kills the Emperor, then he will save a lot of lives, you know, because that'll be good. Of course, it might be more impulsive and just done out of anger, but he grabs his lightsaber and tries to kill the Emperor right there. So he's giving in to this sort of, I'm going to control what's going to happen, you know. And that's utilitarianism, is all about humans controlling outcomes. That's the whole point of utilitarianism. And so essentially what you're doing is something that's, you would normally say is wrong. It's like it's wrong to murder a person, but you say, I'm in control, and I'm going to make something good happen out of this. And from an atheistic perspective, I would say you can play the odds, and it makes rational sense to say, I'm fairly confident that I know what's going to happen. You know, if I harvest these 5 organs, probably I'm going to save these 5 guys. Okay, so the thing is, in Return of the Jedi, Luke, the story's had a lot of Eastern influence up to that point, but it takes a dramatic decisively Christian twist right there, and it pulls ideas from the concept of Christian martyrdom, and it's debatable how cemented Star Wars would be in popular culture without the ending, the story right there. Because when the story is left loose and it's not tied up with a good ending like that, you enjoy it. You enjoy that. It's just like a song that like comes on and you enjoy it, and then all of a sudden it gets bad, and there's no payoff when there's a bad ending, But the thing is, I'm hoping whoever's listening to this has seen Star Wars, because like that's why I'm using it as an example. If you haven't seen Star Wars, then I have another example for you. But Obi-Wan and Yoda don't want Luke to try to save his father and I guess convert his father back to being good. They want him to kill his father. And the whole idea of saving his father, that Luke is just dead set on it, and that's not something they want him to do. And in Empire Strikes Back, Luke goes to save his friends, and Yoda wants Luke to stay and continue his training because it's going to be better in the long run. So again, it's a utilitarian position. Luke, I know I know your friends are in danger. You've been given this vision. You know your friends are in danger. The Force gave you a vision that your friends are in danger. And, of course, it's morally correct to go save them. But if you go now and you face Vader now, then, you'll be all super defeated, and all hope for defeating the dark side will fail. And so it's the exact same situation it's not the exact same, but it's very similar to, with the Nazis, and I know it's wrong to send these sailors to their death, but we have to, because we have to defeat the Nazis. We have to defeat the dark side, And so they're taking a utilitarian stance there, that the ends justify the means. And so instead of just doing the right thing and, he's letting the outcome, control it. The only justification you could give for, Yoda's position there is that his friends, knew what they were getting into, and they understood the cost of this, and they were willing to make that sacrifice for, everything. So, again, it's if someone's willing to sacrifice their life to help others, if I'm willing to, sacrifice, if somebody's, willing to sacrifice their life to help others, that's fundamentally different than murdering someone to save other people. Okay, so, but anyway, at the end of Return of the Jedi, Luke throws the lightsaber down, and it's a very Christian twist, because this is a bad idea. He's supposed to kill the bad guys, and instead he's going to let them kill him because he believes in in goodness, and he's going to help his dad. It really doesn't make any sense without putting Christianity within it. So here's my point. Let's just go to the New Testament. All right. Stephen in the book of Acts is been debating with the Hellenists. I think it's the Hellenists. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And I think the Hellenists are like Greek speaking Jews. I think that's what that means. And so they basically, here's the thing. Stephen goes and he gives this speech explaining why they, what their problem is really and why they need to become Christians. And he's martyred. He is stoned to death for his message about Jesus. Now, up to that point, Stephen had been very effective in teaching and spreading the gospel. So the question is, why doesn't Stephen just say, just capitulate a little bit when he's on trial there? Why does he boldly continue to preach Christ so that he's killed for preaching Christ? Why does he do that? The thing about Stephen in that situation is you could say, all right, Stephen, the ends justify the means. This is a little thing. You could just, just sacrifice just a little bit of, saying what you believe in. And, even, just a little bit. You don't have to fully renounce Christ. I bet there would have been some sort of way to just water down the message a little bit, and they won't kill you. And then think of how many more people Stephen could have preached and evangelized, and how much more ministry he could have done after that if he wouldn't have died as a young man. Okay? It's unsafe. What he's doing is not safe. In other words, safety is all about controlling the results. What happens. And Stephen could have lied, right? He could have just lied, and he could have told everyone, it was like, yeah, I lied and I said that I don't really follow Jesus, but that was so that I could continue to spread the gospel, and I won't be killed, and I'll be able to continue, preaching for Jesus. And why didn't Stephen do that? Ravi Zacharias puts it like this. He talks about the convictions that the early Christians had. He said, they saw the finger of God moving through all of history with Christ as its central figure. The finger of God moving through all of history with Christ as its central figure. In other words, the idea is that if you bring God into the paradigm, you say, okay, now I'm not in a situation that God didn't mean for me to be in. Ever. So, if there's something that I know God wants me to do, then I have to do it. And it doesn't, and the results don't matter, because God controls the results. In other words, whatever's going to happen is whatever's going to happen as far as what God decides to allow to happen. But if God, so I guess the classic example is Daniel's three friends in the book of Daniel, where they're commanded to bow down to the false idol, and they won't do it. And so they are going to be executed and thrown into the fire. And they say, our God is able to rescue us from you, Nebuchadnezzar, and rescue us from your fire. But even if he does not, we will not bow down. So again, it's a similar situation. Think of all the good these three godly men could have done if they would have just bowed down and then told everybody, I just did that so that I could continue God's work. So they didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? because there's someone in control of what happens. And God, yes, I guess whatever happens ultimately is going to be something that is decided by God. Yes, I control things. Yes, you control things. But our control is limited. And, we are always making assumptions. And things happen that we didn't plan on. And that happens all the time. So, I don't know how many times, you think things are going to work a certain way. And then there's fluke situations where things didn't work how you planned. And things don't go how you planned. And that's a regular part of life. And you thought it was going to be like this, and you thought it was going to be like this, and you thought you knew what you were doing, and all of a sudden, what in the world happened? Okay? So, we control stuff to an extent, but we're never truly in control. There's always that oh no factor. There's always that unknown, that X factor. God's truly in control. So, that means that you cannot violate God's commandments because of your ability to control what's going to happen. Because God's in control of what's going to happen. If you know that God said, thou shalt not lie, if you know that God says to tell the truth over and over again in the New Testament, then you tell the truth. Because, and it's not because, you cannot violate a commandment from the one who is in control because you have decided that you can control what's going to happen. Whatever happens is up to him. It's his plan. It may not make sense to you. Of course it won't make sense to you, but it's his plan. And if we die in the fire, it's God's plan. But I cannot violate God's commandments. In Daniel's three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're not going to bow down to that false idol because that's one of the primary commandments that God gave to them. So I think, as people in life, we definitely try to control outcomes, and that's normal and that's fine. But if we're going to violate God's commandments to control outcomes, that starts to make a whole lot less sense, because we're saying, I'm going to control what happens to the person who actually does. And the person who actually does said, now whatever you do, don't do this. Okay? So that's a fundamental difference. There's a really good story on this from a guy named Hien, who Ravi Zacharias always tells this story because Ravi was, and during the Vietnam War, he was a missionary to India. And of course, he's from India, and he went to Vietnam. And so he didn't speak Vietnamese. If he had a translator named Hien, and he said they went up and down that country on a motorcycle telling people about Jesus. And Ravi said he got a phone call long time after that, and it was Hien on the phone, and then he said, where are you? And it's I'm in California. And then, how did you come to California? How did you get out of Vietnam? And so then he told him this amazing story. But it focuses very heavily on this lying thing. So Hien was a Christian, and he spoke English, and of course I think he read French. In the story you can tell he read French, and it's important to understand that before America was running things in Vietnam, the French were for a long time before that. So there's Vietnamese, there's French, and there's English all in there. And Hien, well, of course, the communists take over, and communism is a political system where you're required to be atheist. And Hien is seen as a problem because he's been a Christian missionary. And so he is put in prison. And in the prison, they're trying to re-educate him, so they make him read communist propaganda that's going to push atheism and communism on him. And communism is really good at getting you to fall for it, getting you to go for it, because it's a way of seeing everything. And everything he wasn't allowed to read anything in English. Everything was in Vietnamese or French. And he said one day he was reading something about how I guess the common laborer is like a bird in a cage, or like a monkey in a cage or something like that, and he's rattling the cage. But the cage is capitalism and Christianity and all that. And he was finally persuaded, and he closed it, and he was like, all right, that's it. Today's the day. I'm not going to pray to God at all today. No more praying to God, because I don't believe in God anymore. I'm not going to pray to God. And he became an atheist, as far as he was concerned. And so he said that he was given latrine duty, and he said you would not believe how nasty the latrines were. And he was given latrine duty, and in the latrine, on the poopy paper, he saw some English on the paper, and so he quickly scooped the poopy off and put it in his pocket. And he was going to read it back under his mosquito net that night, I guess with a flashlight. And when he got back, and he finally that night, and he opened up to read it, he saw the top of the page and it said Romans chapter 8. And he said he started reading the book of Romans chapter 8. And he said when he got to the verse that said, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those that love him and are called according to his purpose. He said at that point he broke down and he prayed. And he said, God, here I am, in this place. You wouldn't let me go one day without praying to you. He said slowly over time he started collecting, I think, the whole book of Romans, because he asked for latrine duty again, and he was slowly collecting the book of Romans in the prison, because an officer had been given a Bible by some missionary and was using it for toilet paper. And so eventually he got released from the prison, and he and some other people were getting a boat together, and they were going to escape the country, and they were going to leave the country. And some soldiers came, and they came to his house, and they said, we heard you're leaving the country. Is that true? And he lied, and he said no. And they left him alone, and they left. And he felt very guilty about that. And he said to God, he said he prayed a prayer that he hoped God would not answer. He said, God, I beg your forgiveness. You say it's a sin to lie, and I shouldn't have lied. And he sort of made one of those promises to God. He's like, God, if you send them back, I promise I will tell the truth. He said, I think it was the day before they were about to leave the country on the boat, the soldiers came back and asked him the same question. We heard you're about to leave. Is that true? So, God answered his prayer. It was not the answer that he wanted. But when the moment came, he committed, and he said, yes, me and some other people have a boat, and we're leaving tomorrow. He said they grabbed him. I think he said something like, are you going to put me back into prison? Or something like that. Maybe he didn't rat out the other guys, I don't know. But they grabbed him and took him back into a back room and closed the door and said, we want to go with you. And he said that storms came and they would have all been sunk if it wasn't for the ability of those soldiers. And so that gives you an example. God has a larger plan, Luke, I know Luke Skywalker is a fictional story, but it wound up being Darth Vader that killed the Emperor. Who would have thought, right? And yeah, Stephen was martyred, and even Paul was martyred, and there were so many Christians that were martyred, but it was their willingness to die that encouraged so many other people to believe. And apologetics relies on the fact that they were willing to die for what they believed in. Because ultimately they saw the finger of God moving through all of history with Christ as its central figure. And so that's what I would say to, the pastor who argued to me. And I disagree with him on the spot there, but maybe I would have a more long-winded disagreement. At least share the story about Hien. And it's just that, yes, you try to control outcomes and make good things happen. If I'm going to bake a cake, I'm going to try to control the outcome and make it a good cake. It's not that I don't control anything, But there is always a limitation to what I control. And I can never look at the person who really is in ultimate control, no matter what control, and say, oh, I know I'm going to go against and I'm going to disobey what you told me to do because I'm in control. That's really where the rubber hits the road on that. So anyway, there you have it. Thank you for a phenomenal amount of your time.